Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. This is a video I've wanted to do for a while. I just didn't get around to it. But right now, alhamdulillah, I have the time to do it. So just before I begin here, I'm just going to point out that I am not a liberal Muslim. I'm not a secular Muslim. I'm not a reformist or a progressive kind of Muslim. I consider myself to be a conservative Muslim, and that's how I was raised, and I hope to continue this way. I just mentioned how I'm not, one of those liberal or secular kind of Muslims, and I will be making a video soon, inshallah, exposing them. And also, just before I begin here, I don't make up my own views. Everything I say with evidence. So before this video gets disliked and comment bombed by, Salafis and red pill Muslims and incel Muslims and those holier than thou, self-righteous women, and before those idiots come on who think that nudity and bikinis are the only option to not wearing a hijab or niqab or burqa or jilbab, just hear me out first. I really want to prove my points here. So I'm just going to start off by just directly saying that nowhere in the Quran or in any authentic hadith is hijab or niqab commanded. The Quran does mention a head covering called the khimar, because this was already worn by Arab women at the time, regardless of their religion or lack of. All Arab women at the time, no matter what their belief was, they all had their heads covered. And notice here that Allah, He did not mention khimar. Sorry, I meant to say that Allah does mention khimar in the Quran, but He doesn't command it. This is the important thing to notice. He mentions the head covering, but He doesn't command it. He doesn't say you have to wear it. He mentions it because, again, it was already worn by Arab women at the time. It was a national, Arabian culture. It was part of their custom, as even many men also covered their heads. This is a fact. You can look at any commentary of Islamic or Arab history. Arab women were already covering their heads before Islam was revealed. Islam didn't invent hijab. What the Arab women didn't do a good job was they weren't covering their frontal area, their chest and breast area, and they were also wearing pretty transparent clothes. So the Quran came to correct them on this, but it didn't specifically command for women to cover their heads, faces, or arms, or feet for that matter. The same goes for hadiths. There is no authentic hadith that commands women to wear hijab or niqab. There is a weak hadith where the Prophet tells a woman, where the Prophet says a woman can't show anything except the hands and face when she reaches the age of puberty, but that hadith is weak. There's also hadiths of what the Prophet's wives did, but that's what they did. They ended up covering their faces because they didn't have to cover their heads. They were already covering it. Where did they themselves command this is the way to do it? They didn't. What the Prophet's wives did, it's not the same thing as being explicitly commanded to do it. Another point that I want to make is that the Arab society at the time, it was full of sexual promiscuity and sexual deviancy. I don't think anyone's going to deny that. It's well documented in Islamic history and Arab history that the society at the time, it was pretty vulgar. So, the question comes up, how did women arouse men if their heads are already covered? It makes no sense to me that the Salafis and hijab obsessed people say that hair is aura of women. The Arab women at the time, already with their heads covered, they didn't, as I mentioned, they didn't do a good job of covering their chest area. They didn't do a good job of lengthening their clothes to cover their waist and legs. Their clothing might have also been transparent. This is why the Quranic command came for them to fix up, the societal custom of dressing inappropriately. This is not to say all women were like that. Because even today I live in the West, and we in the West, it's a very sexually promiscuous place. But we see that not all non-Muslim women dress in a promiscuous manner. So there's no reason to believe that all women at the time were all dressing promiscuously. But it was something that was pretty noticed. It was out in the open. So concluding from a Quran and Hadith perspective, it's vague on what a woman should really cover and how to cover. It's not there, and no one can say that it clearly mentions what to cover and how to cover. It's vague. It's not clearly or directly commanded that women must wear hijab or niqab or burqa or jilbab. If it was, then Allah would have clearly written it in the Quran, and the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, would have clearly told what women should wear and what they can uncover and must keep covered. Some advocates for hijab use the colonialism excuse. They say that it's because of colonialism that many Muslim women don't wear hijab. While it's true that colonialism had a negative and long-lasting impact in Muslim countries, which is still felt today, it's not a solid enough argument for hijab. It's true that the French and European colonists in general caused many Arab women to not wear hijab and instead wear Western clothes. The same argument, it can't be made everywhere. For example, in the subcontinent, that's present-day Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh. When the British colonized this region, they left culture and religion to the locals. At the time, the Islamic Empire, known as the Mughal Empire, it ruled the subcontinent. But when the British kind of took over, their rule the Mughal rule became symbolic. But culture and religion was still left to the people. So hijab and niqab in the subcontinent, there is little to no history of Muslim women wearing this in this subcontinent region. This is why even today, the majority of Muslim women from Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh, they don't wear hijab. Actually, it's more of a recent phenomenon to see Muslim women, wearing hijab and niqab and burqa and jilbab and so forth. It's more recent phenomenon. At most, what you usually see is just a dupatta that lightly covers the head, and even then, so it's usually for prayer. Other than that, it just sits on the shoulders of women. The dupatta is part of the clothing that many women from the subcontinent have historically worn regardless of their religion. As a matter of fact, even in the rural areas, in rural Pakistan, in rural India, in rural Bangladesh, it's not uncommon to see women with their heads uncovered. It's not really common to see niqab and hijab. And the people in the rural areas, the Muslim women in Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh, they're obviously would be more pious because they live a more traditional lifestyle. They're kind of secluded away from technology and I guess you can say globalization. They're kind of secluded from that. But even then, so they're religious, and you don't often see hijab and niqab and burqa. You usually see a dupatta on their heads, but even again, that's still for usually reserved for prayer only. Other than that, it kind of just sits on their shoulders, or they just don't have it at all. Even many imams and sheikhs, um, from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, it's common to see their wives and daughters only wear the dupatta, which again, only lightly covers the head, and it usually comes off after prayer. As well, many Muslim women from the subcontinent, they tend to be the most religious women in the world, according to a Gallup and Pew study, which I'll link in the description. So you can kind of logically, deduce that it's Muslim women from this region that are the most religious, because Hindus are usually more liberal. Sikhs are usually more liberal, so that you can obviously come to the conclusion that it's Muslim women who would be the most religious, as proven by the study. So you have Muslim women in this region, in the Indian subcontinent, being the most religious people around, and they're not wearing hijab usually. As I said earlier, women from Arab countries, and you can throw in Turkish and European Muslim countries as well, they dress very liberally because of colonialism or forced secularism, as in the case of Turkey. Also, as in the case of European countries where, Soviet anti-religious sentiment kind of took over. So it's not, it's pretty common to see quote-unquote Muslim women from, many Arab countries and Turkey and European Muslim countries where they're, dressed just like non-Muslim women in a very, I'm not talking about just regular Western clothes, but, inappropriate clothing. And it's because of the influence of colonialism, secularism, liberalism, and so forth. So you can't compare the hijabless women, the Muslim women who don't wear hijab and niqab and burqa from these Arab countries and Turkey and European Muslim countries, to hijabless women of the subcontinent. It doesn't make sense, because as I mentioned, Muslim women from the subcontinent tend to be pretty religious, whereas attitudes towards religion is not as strong in many Arab countries and Turkey and European Muslim countries and so forth, wherever colonialism and forced secularism kind of ruled. The history of Islam in the subcontinent, it's very well documented. It goes back 1300 years. Includes several notable Muslim women who were political leaders, military leaders. Their lives are well chronicled, and you never see description about them being covered head to toe and being hidden away from society. This is another fail for Muslims who use the colonialism as an excuse to justify why Muslim women don't wear hijab or jilbab or niqab in the subcontinent. Literally just before I started this video, I was watching a Pakistani Islamic show where there are clerics sitting on a panel, and they're Deobandi clerics. So those are essentially Taliban clerics. The crowd is mostly made up of women who are watching the show, and mostly without their heads uncovered. Mostly without their heads, they're not covering their heads. Why? Because this is normal for women in Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh. So, putting all that aside, the question comes up, what should Muslim women cover? So let me tell you something. I live in a very liberal Canadian city. I did my schooling in public. I went to public school. I went to a university here. I worked in several jobs when I was in high school and throughout university. And now I have a permanent job. And obviously here everything is like mixed, right? So men, boys and girls, men and women, we go to the same schools, same workplaces. We use the same facilities for a lot of things. I know how men think about women, okay? I was around these non-Muslim men and boys who had a party culture, who had a culture of asking out women and girls on dates and so forth. So I know how they talk, I know how they think, I know how they behave. And let me tell you something. So we men, we're not simply aroused at the sight or presence of women. Okay, no sane-minded straight man is like that. What arouses us men is tight, short, see-through, and revealing clothes. We also get aroused when a woman does something sexual or seductive, which, by the way, can be done by any kind of woman, whether she's nude or completely covered head to toe. So more specifically, we men get turned on by women if they are showing off certain body parts, okay? And I'm going to be a little more descriptive here. Specifically, the breast area and the butt area. These body parts are the biggest sources of arousal for us men, okay? And as I said, I live in the West. I see clothing of women here. There's clothing specifically designed to show off these body parts. Okay? They're specifically designed to cause arousal in men. Men, we really don't notice much of a woman like neck down. Sorry, neck up. We get hypnotized and aroused, and we lose our minds, and we go psycho when we see a very attractive woman who is dressed in a sexual way or doing something sexual. Okay? If you're a woman listening to this, I'm going to tell you right now, your brother, your father, your uncle, they feel the exact same way. If you're a guy listening, then you know without a doubt what I'm talking about. When I mentioned modesty, I specifically refer to clothing and behavior that is, the opposite of what I just mentioned here. When I speak of modesty, I'm talking about clothing that covers the body parts of women that I just mentioned. I know many hijab advocates, they use the term modesty, but to them hijab and niqab and jilbab and burqa are the only modest forms of clothing, and that's just sad. They think like that. Modesty refers to clothing and behavior that isn't sexual. You can obviously do that without having to wear hijab or niqab or burqa. A woman's hair, face, arms, and feet are nowhere near enough to get a man aroused. It could make a man find a woman beautiful, but that's not the same thing as being sexually aroused. And this is what the Quran condemns. Okay, being beautiful, a woman being beautiful isn't wrong, aesthetically speaking. Being good looking is not wrong. Well, what's wrong is being sexual. Wearing sexual clothes and or having some kind of sexual behavior. If you want more proof, just think about what a horny teen boy is thinking about. what he's searching up on his computer, what images and videos he has on his phone. You know, the content that's there, it's most likely women who are completely nude, or at the very least very inappropriately dressed and doing something sexual and seductive. Okay. Me as well, when I was a teen, you know, when I was 15 to 19, I'd say maybe even early 20s, I am myself viewed such content. Okay, I didn't care what a woman's hair looked like. I didn't care what her arms looked like. I didn't care what her feet looked like. I only, you know, paid attention to certain body parts and her, you know, sexual behavior, like dirty dancing. That's what I was, and you know, pretty much every sexually aroused teen boy, this is what they're looking at. They're not noticing anything, you know, neck up or knees down. Okay, it's only between the neck and the waist area. That's where our concentration is. That's where it is. Okay. You know, yeah, like we don't care about her hair, we don't care about arms, we don't care about feet. We're just so distracted by body parts. Men don't masturbate to a woman's hair or arms. Men masturbate when women are doing something sexual or barely covering certain body shapes, or if men actually get an opportunity to have intercourse. These are the only cases where men get aroused, where men are masturbating. These are the only cases. You know, keeping all this in mind, there are Muslim women who wear hijab and jilbab, yet they do certain sexual acts. Okay, like for example, many Muslim women from certain African and Arab countries, belly dancing and twerking is part of the culture, right? So, you know, hijab or tight or revealing or short clothes, that's what we like, right? Sorry, my mistake. Tight clothes, revealing clothes, short clothes, that's what we like. A Muslim woman could be wearing hijab and wearing these exact same clothes, you know, short, tight, revealing, you know, same thing. We'll be aroused. I just want to point this out here. You know, I personally, I don't have any respect for Muslim women who wear sleazy, tight, short, or revealing clothes. You know, these Muslim women, they might use the excuse of hijab not being mandatory to you know, dress in very inappropriate ways. You know, we don't need to address Muslim women in relation to hijab. We need to address inappropriate clothing worn by Muslim women, and that doesn't really matter if they're wearing hijab or not. The tight, revealing, short clothes is what we need to, you know, educate Muslim women on, that these kinds of clothing are not permissible in our religion. You know, this is, you know, just be normal, dress normally. You can wear Western clothes, you can wear fancy Western clothes and still be modest. So the next point that I want to talk about is just general comments about a woman's, you know, body and appearance. I'm going to tell you right now, it's absolutely impossible to 100% hide body shapes. Body shapes and certain body movements, they'll always show no matter what kind of clothing is worn. The same goes for men. Our body shapes and movements also show. You can't totally hide it. So I find it very absurd when a Salafi sheikh or any kind of sheikh talking about a woman's clothing, when they say, oh, women need to wear clothing that doesn't show body shapes and movements. I mean, that's not possible. If you look at a Muslim woman who's wearing a niqab or a jilbab or burqa, if you look closely enough, you will see body shapes and body movements. You can't hide it. The reason being, especially for women, they tend to have more fat and muscle in certain areas, so shapes and movements will show no matter what, and it's not a problem. It's fine. No burqa or jilbab will be able to completely hide it. Obviously, there's no blame on women here. It's just how it is. And the hijab obsessed people should realize that, if you see a Muslim woman who's, she could be wearing a burqa or she could be wearing jeans or a skirt. If she has, a big behind or a big chest or big hips, it doesn't matter if you're wearing jeans or skirt or burqa or a jilbab, the shapes and movements will always show. There's many women who are curvy. What are you gonna do about it? It's stupid how much we stress about this. Yeah, obviously there's a huge difference between this and purposely showing off body parts, which can be done by women in hijab or without it. We live in a world, we live in a stage of Islam where the clothing of Muslim women is the most important thing, when it really shouldn't. Many Muslims, due to, Salafi influence, the red pill Muslims, incel Muslims, the holier than thou, self-righteous women, they've made the dress of women such a huge and unnecessary issue. I mean, yeah, Muslim women do need to dress properly and appropriately, but even if they don't, it's still not the end of Islam. It's not shirk, it's not adultery, it's not riba, it's not backbiting. Those are the biggest sins in Islam. One other point: there is clothing which other Muslims might find revealing, but really isn't. And I'll give you an example of this. There's Muslim countries and cultures where niqab and jilbab and burqa and hijab, it's the norm. If these Muslims go to another Muslim country where this isn't the norm, they'll obviously say, oh my god, those women are nude, those women are wearing tight revealing clothes, even though when you look at them saying, no, that's not tight, that's not revealing, that's not nude, it's just different. My next point I want to make is that we need to stop associating hijabless women with non-piety, not non-religious religiosity. Don't even, you shouldn't even think about it if you see a hijabless woman and think about her level of conviction to religion, Islam, obviously. If there is a Muslim woman, for example, if she's not practicing, or she says or does something sinful openly, or if she says something really stupid about religion, if you want to critique them or correct them, don't bring their uncovered heads into it. Go after them for what they said. Don't associate the lack of head covering with with her sinful behavior. because they're two completely different things. That's the point I'm trying to make. Because I mentioned earlier the women of the subcontinent, often head is uncovered, yet religious wise, they're pretty religious. They take religion seriously. I'm from the subcontinent. I know this as well. I'm from that culture. I have my mother is a very religious woman. She reads Quran daily. She fasts every Monday and Thursday. She taught us. She taught me and my sisters, how to read the Quran. She taught us important du'as, that you need, for everyday protection and success and whatnot. And this is an average Muslim woman from the subcontinent. And just like the majority of Muslim women from the subcontinent, my mother does not wear hijab. Okay, but religion-wise, she is, she takes religion seriously. And that's a great thing. The point I'm trying to make is that, people say, if there is no hijab, then the level of conviction to Islam is little to it's not there. This is a very shameful association. You shouldn't do that, but people do. Another thing is, you shouldn't think of body image or women with perfect bodies in magazines and anorexia and so forth if you're trying to say that hijab is mandatory. This is something that this is an example that I always see on social media. They say that there's many Muslims who say you either wear a hijab, you're a good Muslim woman if you wear a hijab, and the other option is you wear bikini at a beach. To them, there's nothing between. There's no other kind of clothing. This is such an illogical and nonsensical argument. Why do they lack the IQ that these aren't the only two options for a Muslim woman? They think immodesty and nudity is the only option to not wearing hijab or niqab. This is an example I always see over and over again. Yeah, like just think about it. Like, how low an IQ do people have to constantly say, the only option to not wearing hijab or niqab or burqa is a bikini. I've mentioned throughout this video how it really hasn't been in the culture and religious identity of Muslim women from the Indian subcontinent to wear hijab and niqab, and only now recently has it become more popular among women, and it's mostly in urban areas, not so much in the rural areas. In rural areas, they're still wearing their traditional clothing that they've worn for 1300 years. And unfortunately, me being from the subcontinent, and even though I would say the majority of Muslim women from this region don't wear a hijab, the males from this region, especially Pakistani males, they've become really insecure and fragile, and hijab is something that they really obsess about for some reason. Even some political parties in Pakistan, for example, tried to introduce mandatory hijab for Muslim women in certain areas of society. And it's so strange because, like, well, what's the purpose of it? It hasn't been in the culture for 1300 years. The women in there are religious. It's only to score political points. But it's usually the men who make these kind of laws and support these kind of laws. My grandparents are from Pakistan. When they were growing up there, there was no obsession about the clothing of women. They were already dressed, fine, appropriately. They weren't wearing a hijab, but there was no obsession about it. But now it's the opposite. The males do. You can blame Salafi ideology. You can blame the unfortunate growing red pill incel movement among Muslim males. This has all contributed, unfortunately, to a fragile masculinity and be obsessive about hijab on women. One other point I want to make is that there really is no link at all between not wearing hijab or niqab and sexual harassment. In my video that I did, 4 years ago, where it was a response to that that social experiment where that woman is wearing very tight and revealing clothes. She's being harassed, and then in the next segment of the video, she's wearing, a jilbab, and she's not being harassed. A lot of people use that video as, to try and point out, hey, hijab and jilbab, they stop harassment. That's not the case. The countries with, the highest amounts of sexual assault and harassment, they're Egypt and Yemen. Women there are covered completely head to toe, even Afghanistan, completely covered head to toe. So why is sexual assault and rape so high? So that logic fails right there. Another thing is many Muslim women in the West here, they're not wearing hijab, they're not wearing jilbab, they're not wearing niqab, and they go out on the streets and malls, and not even the non-Muslim men bat an eye. So, because I said, straight men will only give attention to tight, revealing clothes that show off body shapes or women doing something sexual. Perverts and rapists and catcallers, they will exist no matter what women wear. Egypt is proof of that. And another thing, what about sex crimes against men and boys? You can look at the shocking statistics about men and boys who experience sexual harassment and sexual assault and rape. Is clothing the issue? What about creepy women who hit on men, who harass men? I was a victim of that. There was a creepy homeless woman. She would camp out at a bus stop here, and when I would try and take the transport, she would say stuff about me. Like, what was I supposed to do? Wear a niqab? What about gay men being creepy to other men? I've had this happen to me too. Because homosexuality is so widely accepted now, it's becoming kind of normal for men to hit on other men, to kind of ask other men out, to check them out. Again, what's the solution here? Should we wear burqa and jilbab so these men, so they can stay away from us? Getting closer to the end of this video here, it doesn't matter if you yourself, it doesn't matter if someone is checking out another Muslim woman, if another man finds her beautiful, or another Muslim woman beautiful. It doesn't matter if they check out your wife, your daughter, your sister, as long as there is no immodest clothing, as long as there is no obvious sexual acts, you have nothing to worry about. Obviously, if a guy is being creepy towards your wife, your sister, daughter, you would tell them to, you would tell them to go away. But what I'm trying to say is, as long as our wives and sisters and daughters, as long as they're not wearing anything immodest, as long as they're not doing anything sexual, from this point forward, if another man checks out our women, there's no sin going anywhere. There's no sin on the woman. She didn't do anything wrong. Even if she's not wearing hijab, that's the whole point of this video. If she's wearing immodest clothes, inappropriate clothes, if she's doing something sexual, then obviously that's an issue, right? And if other men check her out, then then that's a problem. In the exact same way, similarly, your wives, your sisters, your daughters, and mothers, they also kind of get turned on by men too. A man's alright. It doesn't make much sense to me, because women get turned on by shirtless men, men with beards. They have their own fantasies too, as men in cowboy uniforms. But again, as long as there's nothing sexual involved, nothing you can do to prevent people of the opposite gender from being attracted to each other, from being attracted to you. Okay, so the concept of ghira and dayuth and tabaruj, they don't apply here. They only apply if there is inappropriate, immodest, sleazy clothing, sleazy sexual acts. That's only when these concepts apply. The people who use that lollipop or candy covered analogy, they say a lollipop that is covered in a wrapper, no flies will get on it, but if it's uncovered, then flies will get on it. It's often used by hijab advocates. They say women who are uncovered are lollipops. It's a stupid example. Here's another way to look at it. If there's a mad dog running around biting people, do you lock up the dog or the people? Or how about random acts of violence? How can you prevent a random act of violence? You can't. How about car accidents? You can't prevent those either. Maybe we shouldn't drive at all. For the random acts of violence, maybe we should all just stay home so no random act of violence can happen. I'm just saying it's stupid, the lollipop analogy, because this is all the same thing here. The moral and religious society that we Muslims want, the ones that we're looking for, the clean society, it can all be done easily without women having to wear hijab or niqab or burqa. This is easy. Okay, this is proven by the Indian and Pakistani and Bengali Muslims for over 1,000 years, even up until today. Okay, many Muslims, when they want a clean society, a religious, moral, healthy, pious society, they think that, okay, women need to be covered head to toe. They got to be covered head to toe. They have to, stay at home, stay from society. This is the only way you can achieve a good pious society. That's not the case. That you can have all of that. You can have the pious society, the pious, religious, clean society, free from adultery and fornication. You can have it all without women having to wear hijab or niqab or burqa. I'm going to link to some videos and articles by scholars who don't think hijab is mandatory. They include Shabir Ally. He's pretty well known. They include Javed Ghamdi. He is a Pakistani scholar. He's a very traditional scholar as well, rural-based scholar. I think now he's living in the U.S., but he holds the view hijab is mandatory. There's also Khaled Abu El Fadl. You know, he's trained in traditional Islamic sciences, doesn't believe hijab is mandatory. The argument is there. And finally, just to end again, my points that I've mentioned in this video, they have nothing at all to do with liberalism, secularism, progressivism. Nothing. I'm not one of those Muslims. You know, if anything, Islamic movements with liberal Islamic movements that exist today, you know, there's one website, there's one organization called Muslims for Progressive Values. You look at their board of directors, women are wearing hijab. These hijab wearing Muslim women are advocating for a liberal, secular, watered down version of, you know, of Islam. So that's what I'm trying to say. You know, I have nothing to do with liberalism, secularism, progressivism. Okay. Thanks for watching.